dive into a topic that's been making headlines. Transgender women in women's sports. We've got two articles, one from Sky News and one from Al Jazeera, both on President Trump's executive order that's really gotten people talking.
You know, it's interesting. This isn't just a U.S. thing. It's a global conversation, especially with big events coming up like the 2028 Olympics in L.A. and the World Cups. The implications are huge.
Definitely. So this executive order, keeping men out of women's sports, some people are calling it a victory for fairness in women's sports, but others are saying it's discriminatory and harmful to transgender people. What a debate.
It's definitely complex. To really grasp the potential impact, we need to break down what the order actually says.
Okay, let's do that.
Basically, it bans transgender women athletes from competing in female sports and tells schools and athletic associations they have to enforce this right away.
And schools that don't comply could face some serious consequences, like losing federal funding, right? The article mentioned that.
Yeah, that's right. The order basically uses funding as leverage to make sure schools follow the ban. It's a pretty strong move.
And it's interesting, the timing. It was signed on National Girls and Women in Sports Day, which adds another layer to it, don't you think?
Oh, for sure. And President Trump didn't hold back at the signing either. You know, he said things like, the war on women's sports is over, and that his administration wouldn't allow men to beat and batter female athletes. These statements definitely frame the issue from a particular perspective.
Yeah. Strong words. And it's not just talk. The Sky News article even mentioned that Trump might deny visas to trans women athletes who want to compete in the U.S. That's going beyond just American borders.
It raises a lot of questions about how this will affect international competitions and trans athletes globally.
So let's get into the heart of the arguments surrounding this order. Both articles mention concerns about biological advantages. What does that mean exactly?
Well, those who support the ban often talk about the differences in physical characteristics between men and women, things like bone density and muscle mass.
Right, those biological differences.
Exactly. They argue that these differences could give trans women an unfair advantage when competing.
And both articles mention Leah Thomas, the trans woman swimmer who won an NCAA championship. That case seems to be a focal point for a lot of the debate, wouldn't you say?
Absolutely. That case really pushed this issue into the spotlight.
For sure. Now, the articles also presented arguments against the ban. What are some of the main concerns people have who oppose it?
Well, they argue it's discriminatory and could hurt the mental health and well-being of transgender youth. They emphasize how important being part of sports can be for young people, you know, for their sense of self and belonging.
So they're worried about the message this sends, especially to trans kids who are already facing a lot of challenges.
Exactly. The Al Jazeera article even quotes Olivia Hunt from Advocates for Trans Equality. She argues that banning trans youth from sports sends a harmful message, a message of exclusion.
Makes sense. And it sounds like LGBTQ advocacy groups are also speaking out against this order.
Yes, groups like Athlete Ally and GIL ADD are mentioned in both articles. They're saying the order is discriminatory and potentially harmful to the whole transgender community, that it creates a hostile environment for trans athletes and might make them afraid to participate in sports at all.
This whole debate seems connected to legal interpretations, too. Both articles talked about Title IX. Can you explain what that is and how it plays into this discussion?
So Title IX is a 1972 civil rights law that says you can't have sex-based discrimination in education programs, including athletics, that get federal funding. It's a big deal. It's been super important for promoting gender equality in education and sports.
Okay, so how does Title IX apply to this situation with transgender athletes?
Well, that's where the interpretations get complicated. Some people say the executive order actually upholds Title IX by making sure things are fair for cisgender women athletes. They say allowing trans women to compete in women's sports could create an uneven playing field, and that might violate the rights of cisgender women under Title IX.
But other people see it differently, right? They say this order actually goes against the whole point of Title IX.
Right. They argue that Title IX is meant to protect all students from discrimination based on sex, and that includes transgender students. They say excluding trans women from women's sports is discrimination based on sex, and that violates the core principles of Title IX.
Sounds like a legal gray area that could cause problems down the line.
Yeah, and legal experts think this executive order will probably face legal challenges. There's a lot of uncertainty about how this will play out in court.
And then you add in public opinion, which seems divided too.
Absolutely. The Sky News article mentions a 2023 Gallup poll that showed a majority of Americans supporting sex-based participation in sports. That suggests a lot of people agree with separating sports based on biological sex, which is the thinking behind the executive order.
So it's clear this is a complicated issue with many different perspectives and potential consequences.
Yeah, it's a lot to untangle. A lot to untangle for sure. This whole situation brings up so many questions about biology and fairness and legal stuff and societal attitudes and individual rights, It's like we're at a crossroads.
And it feels like we're trying to figure out what fairness even means here.
Mm,
Like, what does it look like for transgender athletes? What about for cisgender women athletes? It's tough.
no doubt about it. And it's a conversation we need to have more and more as we go forward.
One thing that really hit me while reading these articles was the weight of this whole issue. We're talking about people's identities, their right to participate. This isn't just some theoretical debate. This is real life with real consequences for people.
You're absolutely right. It's so important to remember that behind all the headlines and the legal arguments, there are real people whose lives are being changed by these decisions.
Makes you wonder what's next. What are the ripple effects of this order? Will it actually be enforced? What will the legal challenges be like? So many unknowns.
Yeah, those are all great questions, and honestly, the answers aren't clear yet. It's like uncharted territory in a lot of ways.
Feels like we're just at the beginning of a much bigger conversation.
I think you're right. This is just one chapter in a much larger story about inclusion and equality and how our understanding of gender is changing in society.
So where does that leave us? What are your takeaways from all of this?
Well, it's obvious this issue is super complex. There are strong feelings and valid concerns on all sides. I think it's important for everyone to stay informed, to have respectful conversations, and to really consider the human impact of these policies, the real people affected by all of this.
It's definitely a lot to think about.
Yeah.
This isn't just about sports. It's about how we define fairness, how we treat each other, and how we build a society that's truly inclusive for everyone.
It's a deep dive in every sense of the word.
This whole conversation really makes you think about the potential unintended consequences.
Absolutely. It's crucial to consider the broader societal implications. What kind of impact might this have on the future of sports? How might it affect the lives of transgender individuals?
Especially young people.
Yeah, especially young people who are already navigating so much. And what about our overall understanding of gender and inclusion?
Big questions.
These are all questions we need to grapple with as a society.
It's given me a lot to think about, for sure.
Yeah.
This deep dive has shown just how multifaceted this issue is. There are valid concerns and arguments on all sides.
And that's exactly why it's so important to stay informed and have thoughtful discussions, really trying to understand the human impact of these policies.
For anyone who wants to learn more, I definitely recommend checking out the full articles from Sky News and Al Jazeera.
Yeah.
They offer a lot of context and insights from different perspectives.
It's so important to stay curious and keep learning and be open to challenging our own assumptions, as we navigate this complex and evolving issue.
Well said. And on that note, I think we've reached the end of our deep dive. Until next time, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep the conversation going.